So my name is Dave Meyer. I'm not exactly sure what the rest of the program has looked like for the weekend, but I'm not a contractor. I'm not even a professional. About 8 years ago, I was sitting in the stands at Restoration Weekend. I just bought an old house, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do to make it livable. It was in bad shape, had some significant window problems, lots of other problems, masonry, roof, etc. I've worked through that building and now a couple more, and I have discovered that I very much enjoy working on old wood windows. I probably have repaired several hundred at this point. I've consulted with some folks on historic preservation tax credit projects in terms of identifying which windows need repair and what the right process is. But that said, I still am functionally identical to a random homeowner who just happens to be a very dedicated and devoted window repair person. So can I have a show of hands? Who is a homeowner and who is a contractor? Contractor. Okay, so we got one contractor, everyone else is actually a homeowner, and you guys are all trying to figure out how to repair your own windows. Is that the situation we're in? Okay, so we can start with why you should try to repair your old wood windows. They are, aside from the fact that you might be required to, aside from the fact that they maintain the appearance of your house and the historic integrity of it, they actually are in many ways better than modern windows. There's some preference involved, and obviously there's some debate about that, but the key thing about these windows is that they are simple. They are easy to work on. They are not scary. There is very little that you can do to a window that will cause permanent damage or damage that can't be repaired. And they were made, many of them were made right here, either in Covington or in Newport. A lot of the old buildings down here were in fact window repair places. A place called Road ID over on 8th Street in Covington made half the windows in the city of Covington. If you'll excuse my color here, they weren't made by skilled labor. They were made by folks who were new to the area, recent immigrants, Irish, German immigrants, folks who were here applying skills that, frankly, all of us can now do. So these are repairable windows. There are energy efficiency concerns that I'm sure all of you have thought about. And you will never get them to be as protective against radiant temperature movement. You will never be able to get a double pane of glass in one of these old sashes. But you will be able to get them as airtight, if not more airtight, than a modern window. And you will be able to do that fairly easily. That is the beauty of these is that when your gaskets fail, and they always do, your air seals fail on windows, anything that's sliding, when that happens, on these you can fix it. On a modern window, you need to replace it. So whether it's a $200 vinyl window or a $1,200 aluminum clad wood window, when the gaskets fail, they need significant work. Whereas with these, sometimes it's a $3 fix. So we can start by talking about how they work. Is everyone? If you have questions, you can just shout them out, by the way. So this is a classic, very typical, very simple double hung window. This is the inside that we're looking at. The outside window is the sash is the upper sash. They are trapped between 3 pieces of wood on either side that form a box for the weights. There is a counterweight system that lets them slide up and down and prevents them from falling. This is a small window and it has 6-pound weights on either side. Some of the windows in this area can have 12 or 15-pound weights in the weight pockets, so a 30-pound total counterweight, which is quite significant in terms of the mass involved. So your outer sash, it slides in between the front permanent stop and in between a removable piece of wood. This removable piece of wood is called alternately a parting bead or a glazing spline. So it is almost always a 3/4 inch by 1/2 inch piece of wood. This is some poplar that I cut today. They go into grooves or dados in the jamb. These are replaceable pieces. You can buy them at every non-Home Depot store in the area. You can get them at Kelly Brothers, you can get them at Doppy's. I'm sure you can get them somewhere in Campbell County, although I'll admit I'm a Campbell County guy. And it's like $1 a foot, or so whenever you're working on these windows, you almost certainly need to start with your consumables, and your parting bead or glazing spline is one of them. So you put it in, tack it in. The outer sash slides between the fixed stop and the parting bead. In terms of air tightness, you're going to have 2 separate types of gasket. Every double hung window has 2 sliding gaskets per sash and 2 compression gaskets per sash. So up in the top, you're going to want a bulb or a foam, any of the very. Go ahead.
Do you have examples of those?
I did not bring any examples of them, unfortunately.
Can you draw like a set?
I can absolutely. I'll get to it in a second.
Okay.
Compression gaskets are, for this purpose, you would probably want one that's just a stick-on, an adhered gasket. You can get them at Home Depot. They will. You can get them in 2 different variations that I would recommend. One is just a teardrop shape. This part would be adhered. You would stick it to the top, and when you raise this sash, it presses down, or presses it, and so this flattens out. And that's going to be just it's rubber. It's $2 for, it's extraordinarily cheap, but it will form an airtight seal, provided that the gap at the top of your window is less than like 1/4 of an inch. So compression gasket goes at the top. In the sides, you have sliding gaskets. The windows have to slide. And when you're looking at your window, almost all of them rattle, right? They've got some wiggle room. The best way to get that sliding gasket to work well is called without doing major work, is called a pile seal. So it is it has like a wool or a plastic that is fuzzy, almost like a hairy type seal. Again, they're at Home Depot. If you go, you'll look, and they're not as watertight as something like this, but they are very good for air sealing, and they reduce the friction for the sliding window. So you can, 2 sliding seals, sliding gaskets on either side, and a compression gasket on the top, and 9 times out of 10, it's going to solve all of the air movement through this sash, through this upper sash. Now, it gets a little trickier with the lower sash. One, the lower sash and the upper sash meet. And I'll pull this off a little later so we can look at it, but they're angled. So the lower sash has a piece that sticks out, and the upper sash has a piece that sticks out. And when they're properly positioned, the wood pieces touch. The angles actually touch each other. So there is a compression area in between these 2 sashes. So this same sort of gasket, you can either do this type, you can do a bulb seal, which is going to be more like that, but you need a compression gasket in between the 2 meeting rails. And if you have that compression seal there, your outer sash is going to be as tight as if you caulked all the way around it. If you have the 2 compression gaskets and the sliding gaskets, you're going to be in very good shape in terms of an air tightness. The lower sash is actually a little trickier. There are removable pieces that go on the outside here, and I did not bring full-sized examples. Actually, I did. It's in the back of my truck, and it got rained on. But this piece here, it is something you have to take off in order to remove the lower sash. There is a gasket on the outside here that is the second disposable piece. So much like you've got the parting bead or spline in between the two sashes, you have an ornamental piece or a decorative stop that goes on the outside of the lower sash. And that is where you put your sliding gasket. So your pile seal, you take off your stop, you put a pile seal on the inside of it, and it should seal appropriately with your window. You can do a compression seal on the bottom of the lower sash, and at that point, all four sides of the lower sash are air sealed, and 9 times out of 10, that's going to solve your rattles, your air movement, and it's going to significantly improve the energy efficiency and comfort of the window. So that's probably what most of you guys wanted to talk about, is the actual air tightness and making them more efficient. Am I right on that? Do you want to go and discuss in any more detail? Do you have questions or additional thoughts about the way you would gasket this, the appropriate way? Yep.
Mine have the aluminum type.
Is it the metal?
The metal,
Okay.
yeah, it'll slide in a groove that's cut on the.
Yeah, so there are two types of, before this stuff existed and you could go to the hardware store and buy it, there were much more permanent approaches to gasketing. And they have a lot of virtue even today. They are harder to maintain and harder to install for the first time. There are two types of spring bronze, is what they're called, spring bronze gaskets. So one is an interlocking gasket, and it can either be a kind of a T shape where a piece would stick out from the side of the jamb into a groove in the window, and that T shape holds the sash in place as well as providing some degree of a seal. Sometimes you're just going straight into a groove in the wood. Sometimes there's a mating piece of bronze on the inner sash. The other approach with spring bronze is it's just a leaf, and it's shaped like this, and you nail every 2 inches, hundreds of little nails on the inside of the jamb, and that spring bronze will keep air from coming through quite effectively. So these are the historic ways, and it is possible to repair almost any of the issues with spring bronze because it can be bent. It's especially the interlocking system, it's pliable. You can try to bend it back into shape with a pair of linesman's pliers or that approach. It is hard. A lot of folks will hammer it down and paint over it, or historically, the last 40, 50 years, that's been the way a lot of folks handled it, was a hammer and paint, which doesn't provide many opportunities for repair. So you can still buy this. So if you have 12 windows and 2 of them have had the bronze weather stripping damage, you might want to replace it with a like material so that your windows are all similar. But what is the issue that you're having with you have the interlocking system where it's in the groove in the sash?
Well, we've gone ahead and repaired them, so I don't have any issues any longer.
Okay.
It was hard to find that material. I'm trying to think of the name of the store.
There's House of Antique Hardware is one that I know you can get a lot of this stuff from. There are online vendors that still provide it. Comes at a bit of a premium usually, but the spring bronze, if we all had all the time and money in the world, the spring bronze approach, either the leaf or the interlocking system, is probably the most effective. It is a lost art in many cases in home repair. So It does work though. So any other questions or any other thoughts about the
Storm windows,
storm windows?
are they, if you, let's say, are able to do very good gasketing work and you
Right.
reduce airflow to zero, to a minimum, you will still, as you said, through radiance, through the
Right.
radiant transmission, you're gonna have heat loss.
You will.
So the question is, if I, let's say, restore a window to its optimum operational capability, is it still recommendable to add storm windows with the air pocket created serve as an insulation?
So it is. Storm windows are a historically appropriate approach to dealing with this. There are a set of modern aluminum storm windows that are just kind of attached to the outside of the jamb. It can work. It is not necessarily the best way to get to significantly improve your energy efficiency or to maintain the health of the window. First, most of them are designed not for air sealing but for water penetration, the modern aluminum ones. And they do work in that regard. They will be open at the bottom and let air move through the aluminum enclosure, but they keep the water from damaging the historic windows. The traditional approach would be a series of removable storm windows that would typically be wood, also wood frame windows. You'd have attachments at the top that you would hook them on, and you could either attach them at the bottom, or there are locks that you just rotate and secure the storm windows in. So you can see there are some very good examples of historic storm windows in the area. I can think of a couple on Main Strasse that I walk past every day. You would have to have them custom made in this environment to have a wood frame storm window. In terms of energy efficiency, it works. I mean, a nice wood storm window will, in fact, dramatically improve even a well-gasketed window's thermal performance. It can essentially get you up to a double pane structure. So there are issues, though. The wood is a movable, I mean, it is a living material, essentially. So every wood window needs to be able to dry. So if you put too much of an enclosure on the outside, you can get condensation in between the two materials. You can get liquid that essentially will condense on the inner pane of glass and cause rot on the interior of the sill or on the lower sections of the jamb. So that is a problem. It's a problem that you're only going to run into if you are extremely tight with the storm window and the fit. If there is opportunities for water to, hold on. So if you get opportunities for water to evaporate out, or if there is any gap, you will probably not have an issue with condensation. So storm windows are the best approach. I have made storm windows. I switch them. I would do a screen in the spring and a storm window in the winter, and I prefer to make inward opening casements so that I can have the screen and just take it in and out and do it all myself without even going outside. It is a very good approach that, if you can make it yourself, is very cost effective, but it does require finding someone who can customize and build the sash. Here, let me do. Yes.
So I've got windows in my house that look a lot like that. What kind of things do I need to pay attention to? What kind of issues are in this window that need to be repaired, and how would you go about that?
Okay. So if your windows are in good shape and you're just trying to air seal them, the gasketing is pretty much what you need to do. If you are doing a full repair, or if you have a window that's problematic and you've got some issues, the first thing you do is start taking it apart. So you remove the stops on the outside. You will gently fold the lower window in, or the lower sash in. You can remove the sash cord, lower the weights down in the pocket.
So the question right there, because we can't see into the sash of the weight pockets, how would you prevent the cord from falling in?
So ideally the knot on the end, which is used to attach the sash cord to the sash, will be large enough that it can't go through the pulley. If the knot is not large enough, you should make it larger. So the knot should be enough to prevent the cord from slipping down into the pulley. So when you remove the lower sash, the first thing you need to look at is the condition of the sill. 99% of the damage to these old windows that's not structural or shifting the materials is caused by deterioration of the condition of the sill. You can have a kind of cascading effect where the paint fails and you get some cratering or some cracks where water can accumulate, and it can get the entire sill wet, damp. It doesn't dry out, it rots, and you can get it so it works up the sides of the jambs to the point where the bottom of the sill needs to be completely replaced, and you've got major woodworking to do in terms of the windows. So the first and most important thing by far is making sure that the sill itself is in good shape. And when I say it's in good shape, it needs to be watertight, it needs to not have any cracks or gaps, and it needs to shed water. So it needs to be in the condition where, and if you pour water on it, it will run off onto the lintel or onto the masonry, whatever. It will not have any ponding water on the sill. So you can have, 9 times out of 10, or quite regularly, you're going to have to do repair work here. I use scrapers. This is the actual scraper that I use almost 90% of the time. It attaches to a vacuum, and it's a product. It's called the Oneida Air Viper. I will scrape the sills in order to see what I'm dealing with. Sometimes the wood is soft. The main test for the integrity of wood is going to be just to poke it with a screwdriver. That's the fancy way. If your screwdriver can penetrate the wood, you're going to need to remove all of the rotten wood and replace it. Usually that's done with Bondo. So you can actually repair a sill with a chemical like that rather than splicing wood, or with an epoxy-based product rather than splicing wood into it, and provided that you paint it well, it's going to work. So the first step, yeah.
You're at the point of window weights. Ask me a question. Is there a port or an access to get through window weight from
So
the inside?
there is, I don't know if you can see it, but there are, on the interior of each section of this jamb, at the bottom, there is an angled piece that looks exactly like this. And it will fit in. You can't mess with it until after you've taken the parting bead out. So I'll when we dismantle the window a little more, I'll show you how that works. But there is a weight access pocket. So this is the sash weight pocket. You are able to access the weights through this space in the front of every wood window.
So you don't have to disassemble the whole system just to change the
So in order to change the weights, you need to remove the parting bead also. Once you've got the parting bead or the spline out, you're able to remove that section and access the actual weights. So, that's on almost every wood window repair work, you should count on replacing this piece, and ideally you want to replace the exterior stop with this is supposed to look nice. This is a pretty wood. So you want to try to remove this without damaging it, but it does get damaged quite regularly. So in terms of, so I will show that to you in a second, but I can't emphasize enough, damage to wood windows starts at the sill. When it cracks and starts ponding water, you get rot and the window fails. When you talk to folks who think, oh, my windows are repairable, it's because the sills are bad. And when you're doing routine maintenance, that's what you need to focus on initially, is just making sure that the sills are drained properly so that there's no ponding water, and that they are painted so that there's no way for water to get directly into the wood. So we'll talk about paint and stuff in a minute also. The other issues with windows, when the sill gets bad, you often will have rot or deterioration on the lower section of the lower sash, on the lowest rail. So this one is in quite good shape, but you'll have rot here, you'll have rot here, and this is the end grain. On a sash, so you've got style, rail, and this section here, the way the wood works, this orientation absorbs more water. So you will often see rot and water damage on the outer corners because of the way that this is situated. And again, if your sill is draining properly and you don't have standing water, the odds of this causing a problem are minimal, but it can happen. The way these sashes are built, the way all sashes are built, old ones, this piece of wood here, and it's up here also, it's called a tenon, and it's actually attached here. The lower rail goes through a slot, which is called a mortise, in the style. And when you get rot down here, you can have this stuff, the tenon start to rot also, and you can have the lower rail actually separate from the style. So repairing that is a woodworking job. It's not actually difficult to repair that. You can do it with a $5 chisel and a handsaw. The way that these were attached, they often didn't use adhesives, or if they did, they would use what's it called, hide glue, which is made from horse hooves. And hide glue is a fantastic product, but it lasts for about 100 years. So we have, most of these windows are more than 100 years old, so the glue has often failed at these joints, if there ever was any, which means that you can kind of tap them apart with a hammer. You can often just disassemble the styles and rails by removing the glass and tapping them apart and cutting new wood and putting it in. Our glues, tight bond, any wood glue, even Elmer's wood glue, is way stronger than anything you could get back in the day. And this wood all of the old wood, most of it is a hard pine that was used around here, all of it glues very well. So you can get...
So if you were to be repairing it, you would be trying to replace it with hard pine?
So that's a very good question. You probably will not be able to replace it with hard pine since you can't get it anymore. If it's on an area where there's water damage and it's water exposure, I would typically use cedar. So you can get a cedar 2x4 from Lowe's. Cedar is a hardwood, but it's very soft and workable, and it's very rot resistant. So I have a stash for myself of cypress and cedar, both of which are extremely rot resistant, but they're workable woods. So I strongly recommend you not use a cutoff of a 2x4 or a cutoff of even a southern yellow pine or stud type wood. I don't believe has the rot resistance to be used in this sort of application. There are approaches you can take to improve it, but in general, you're going to want to use a naturally rot resistant wood for any splicing. You're talking, one 2x4 of cedar from Lowe's is probably like $50 now, but it should be like $12. You can splice it you can repair 12 windows with it, or it's spending the additional money on the naturally rot resistant wood will amortize out over the course of a window repair job quite effectively. So in cedar, the only issues with it are that it's hard to paint. And actually that's a good segue. One of the critical steps in maintaining wood windows is painting them. It's the upside of the wood windows is that you can change their appearance, you can improve their appearance with a coat of paint. But it does have to be done, and it should be done somewhat regularly. My approach, if I have wood windows that are essentially bare, the first thing I'll do is treat them with a wood preservative. Copper coat is the one that I use. It's available at any home goods store. You can buy a quart and do probably 10 sashes with a quart. A little goes a long way. If the windows are bare wood, you can seal them with copper coat, and it will provide an additional measure of rot resistance. You then should prime them with a good primer. There are two different approaches. If the wood is in very good shape, I'll use an oil-based primer called Cover Stain is what I usually use. Again, it's available at any hardware store. I only use the Cover Stain because it does limit moisture movement through the wood. Oil-based products are more moisture resistant than water-based products. But if the wood is not in perfect shape, I'll use a Peel Stop is not the right one. I think it's Peel Bond from Sherwin-Williams, which is a water-based paint that dries very hard and helps firm up the wood, the substrate. So Peel Bond, I think it might even be called Extreme Peel Bond. I'll have to check my notes here in a minute. But so if the wood is in good shape, I use the oil base, and then I'm done with it. If the wood is if I'm worried about it, I'll use the Peel Bond to try to strengthen it a bit. So the primer is one thing. The actual paint that you use on your windows, though, is probably the most important thing that people do wrong when they're trying to do right. Windows have to slide, and modern water-based paints have a problem called blocking. Blocking is when one water-based paint comes into contact with another water-based paint. After minutes or hours or days, they will adhere to each other. Water-based paint sticks to itself. There are some great water-based paints that have a bad blocking problem. There are your approaches to dealing with this are, one, you can use an oil-based paint, which is great if you can do it, but oil-based paints are much harder to get a good. They're harder to use. They're harder to clean. It's a more difficult process to paint with oil-based. There are specialty water-based paints. There's two specific lines that I recommend, and there's a third that I haven't been able to try, but I suspect it would work well too. PPG Porter Paints has a product called Breakthrough. It's been around for a while now, but Breakthrough is an indoor-outdoor paint that it has extremely high blocking resistance. So you can paint your sashes and your jams, and after a day, when you put the sash back in the jam, it will slide and not stick. So PPG has a Breakthrough. Benjamin Moore has a product called, it's actually one of the Benjamin Moore lines called Corotech, Corotech Command, C-O-M-A-N-D. Corotech Command is a part of their industrial line, but it has extraordinarily good blocking resistance. Also, they use it to paint floors and paint factory surfaces so that you can walk on them. So it doesn't stick to itself, and it doesn't stick, it doesn't have the blocking problem. Then there's a Sherwin-Williams product called Snap Dry. I've been trying to get it for a year and a half, and the supply chain stuff is broken, so you can't actually get it. So I don't know if it works or not, but it's intended for this application. So it's a door and window paint that I suspect would work pretty well. The Corotech Command and the PPG Breakthrough are available today. They're not cheap, but it's in the $75 or $80 a gallon range. But painting a window, you can get 10 windows out of a gallon, so it's not a high. Yes.
So you mentioned the sill as like the place to start for
Yeah.
problems. Are there other common problems you've seen in the windows that you've fixed?
So in terms of the routine maintenance, usually what I do, I have done, every window that has a problem with the sill. So you start at the sill and work your way up. The other issues you can run into are more structural issues, where your brick walls have shifted, or your sill and the top piece are not 90 degrees anymore because of movement in your building. And those are actually fixable too. You can't fix the masonry unless you're really getting in depth there. But the beauty of the wood windows is that you can cut them, or you can improve the fit. I have my little hand plane. Like you can just take a block plane to a wood window to improve its fit, and it might seem like sacrilege, but it's actually not. That's why they're made the way they were made. If you have, like on this window, the top piece bulges, right? So it there's a gap, a 1/4 inch gap on either side when the top of this sash is touching the top of the jamb. If I were trying to fix that, I would take my little block plane and shave this portion of the sash down to the point where it fit properly. And that's like a 3-minute process. So you just, a block plane, if you haven't used one, it's just a little blade that shaves the wood. That's how they would have been fit originally. Why don't I actually take a minute here and open it up for, are there other questions along what Christopher's talking about, that issues that you might want me to talk through?
I tried to replace the ropes, and evidently I used the wrong thing because they stretch to the point where it didn't work properly.
So, there are re-weighting your sashes is a bit of an art. So this is what the sash pocket looks like. When the upper window, when the outer sash is all the way up, where it usually is going to be, the weight is down at the bottom. If your cord is too long, this weight will hit the bottom of the jamb, and it won't exert enough force on your window to keep it up. So if it's too short, when you lower your window all the way down, the weight will hit the pulley before it gets all the way down, and you won't be able to lower the sash all the way. So if this were 6 inches shorter, this weight would hit the pulley and it wouldn't work. So there are different grades of rope, of sash cord. This is actually a pretty high grade. It's much more than a 6-pound weight requires. If you've got 10-pound weights and you use the lightest weight of sash cord, the sash cord, which is just a cotton cord, can stretch and cause issues. And if it's too long, like I said, it won't hold the sash all the way up the top. So there are, I know Klingenberg's over in Covington sells multiple weights of sash cord. You can upgrade all the way to a chain. A lot of folks will actually have a chain. So is it not holding the sash all the way up? Is that the issue?
Well, I fixed it now,
Okay,
but
yeah.
it worked at first, and 2 weeks later, it didn't work because it had stretched too much.
Yeah.
So I used a nylon cord instead of a cotton cord.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's an organic product. The cords are even organic. Sometimes they can get wet, and if they get wet, even, while you're installing them, if they get wet, if it gets rained on like I did while I was coming over here today, the cotton can expand just like cotton clothes. So the only reason to avoid the heavier cord is that it's harder to tie a good knot with, and it can be a little irritating. But it's, just if you get the tighter woven cord, it's going to be harder to work with, but it's going to last just fine. The way that I do this, the way that I measure is to, you pull the, here, actually, we'll get to that in one more second. So let me finish dismantling this window here real quick. So when you're taking out the parting bead, or the spline here, you have to lower your outer sash all the way down. And then you can take a pair of pliers or whatever you need to and pull the bead out. If you have your sash up, the meeting rail, which has that angled piece I talked about, will prevent this piece from coming out. So you lower the window all the way down, you take the bead out. Once you have one of them out, you can almost always remove the window. So it should slide out just like that. So, and you've got to take the cord off and all that. Actually, we'll do that real quick. But, so, right, so once we have that parting bead out, you can now see the weight pocket access panel. So this piece here, there should be, I'm sorry, I just grabbed a bunch of them, but there will be a piece that fits in here just like this. That came off a different window, obviously, but there will be a line here. You have to fit a small pry bar down in and wedge it out. It should be held in by a single nail that goes through the angle up at the top. You can see how there's an angle. That single nail is all that should keep that access panel in. Once you've got it out, you should be able to pull the weights through and access the knots. So, you have a name. Did you see that okay? So, if you, well, let me, are there any questions or any thoughts about it?
So that's the only nailing that you do, that one nail?
There should be one nail total that holds that access panel
In
in.
the whole assembly to make?
So, when you're repairing them, you should nail the splines, and these should be nailed in, and the exterior stops should be nailed in. There are fancy approaches to the stops which can use a screw and an elongated hole so that you can adjust them. Remember that the wood it expands in the summer with humidity, and it contracts in the winter. So you can have issues where a window that's extremely tight in August is a little loose in February. You want it to be tight in February because that's where your cold air comes in. So you can use an elongated hole on the stops to move that, loosen the screw, push it tighter up against the window and tighten it back up. Most of the time, that's not how we handle things, but that was a very fancy approach way back in the day. So, you don't need to use a nail gun for any of this stuff. I use tiny little brad nails to hold this stuff in. There are zero forces on any of this. You are not dealing with something that requires a big hammer. So I like to use poplar for this. It's easily available, and it is easy to work with. It's not rot resistant at all. So if you're doing it, you need to make sure it's well painted and protected. And the other reason I like that is some of the better woods have grain, significant differences between the hardwood and softwood. And when you nail through, the tiny little brad nails can bend out and cause damage to the material. So a wood like poplar is very good for this application. Yeah, any other questions? Yes?
Just finish up on my question. There's no magic science to the length of the rope. Basically, you're tying where the rake is and just where it sticks out through the top hole there.
So you can calculate it, the length of the weight plus the difference between on your sash, right? That is so if you take this distance, you're almost always going to be okay if the weight is just barely touching the ground or just barely suspended in the bottom of the weight pocket. So when you look at it through this access patch, these are a little shorter than they need to be. These were very easy because I could see them. They weren't hidden when I tied the knots. So if your knot here is where it catches on the pulley, if your weight is just barely touching the bottom of the wood or just a little bit above it, you're going to be okay. So that is the rule of thumb. There is a fancy formula, but I don't think we need to go into it. You know, the sash cord is just held into the window with the knot. And I always cut it a little long, and if there are any issues, I just redo the knot and move it up an inch. So there's not a lot of your unfixable damage you can do with that process. So are there any other questions, thoughts? Yes.
Mine goes back to the subject of painting.
Yes.
The window I want to repair is, it's natural on the inside. It's not, I want to keep it that way.
Okay.
So, and I think I need to replace one of the pieces of wood. What type of wood these were originally?
So most of them were pine, but it's entirely possible that yours is not. On most of the windows, the interior finish, if they're unfinished, would have just been a shellac. It's usually going to be an amber shellac. And shellac is actually it uses alcohol as a solvent. So you should get some rubbing alcohol and a cotton swab and try to clean it. And if it removes some of the shellac, you'll be able to see better what the actual wood looks like. You'll be able to tell better by its natural color. You'll be able to tell what type of wood it is once you clean that up. So it's almost certainly going to be a shellac-based finish on the interior of your unpainted window.
I'm sure I'll have to sand it or whatever. So it's stained to get things
Yeah,
to match.
I mean, if you remove some of the finish in it, you'll be able to tell if it looks like pine.
Okay.
But it is an old pine. If you're trying to do that, you're into the artistic side of things, and if it's just a small amount of wood, you can pretty much ask anyone. I have plenty of old pine that I would give you if you want to splice a piece in, but you're going to be mixing and matching, trying to be artistic there.
Just polyurethane?
So if you wanted to polyurethane, so you can use any polyurethane on the inside of a window. You can also just go back with an amber shellac. So it's probably not getting a whole lot of weather exposure if it's unfinished on the interior, but you can either, Zinsser sells a shellac that you can just use. So, and it's available at most of the hardware stores. I forgot to talk through one thing. One of the other major points of failure is actually the glazing putty, or the joint between the glass and the sash. So here, all the way around, there are a couple, it does need to be watched, The glazing putty is not, it is a disposable, or it's a replaceable part of the window. You need to reglaze every 40 years or thereabout. So a lot of these windows have failures there where the glazing putty will separate from the glass, there will be a gap, water will run down the glass into that crack at the bottom, get into the wood and cause rotting the sill. So real quick, there are two different types of glazing putty. There's a water-based putty, which comes in like a caulk tube that actually works quite well. And then there are oil-based putties. I actually brought some. The most common you're going to see is DAP 33. It works like Play-Doh. It's a great product. It's very slow to dry though. So you would remove the old damaged glazing putty and reglaze.
Do you have any trouble getting the old glazing off?
So you can. Sometimes the old glazing is extremely hard and calcified. Glazing putty is linseed oil and lime. So it's lime like you would, from industrial lime or like in mortar, and linseed oil. So it's a drying oil that essentially can turn to concrete or turn cementous. So it can get very hard. There are, if you're not able to remove it with a chisel or the appropriate saws, like this is the tool you're supposed to use to remove glazing putty, where you'll take it in and just kind of saw through it. If it's too hard, there are chemicals that you can use. There's a super environmentally friendly stripper called Dumont Chemicals Easy Strip, which as far as I can tell does not do anything to paint, but it does dissolve glazing putty. So I've tried to use it to strip windows before and it didn't do anything to the paint, but the glazing putty softened up almost immediately. So there are approaches you can take like that. You can use a heat gun, but if there's lead paint involved, you don't want to do that. There are radiant heating devices that you can use if it's extremely difficult, but in general, you're going to want to try one of the chemicals. Either citrus strip should work on it, or something like the Easy Strip. Yes?
Have you ever used a steam box?
So I've never used a steam box. I do have the little wallpaper steamer. I have used that before, and it does work.
Does that work for the putty?
So I have actually never needed to use it on hard putty before. My approach with extremely difficult putty is actually just I have a bunch of chisels and I have a sharpening setup, and I keep the chisels very sharp, and I'm almost always able to get through it. I will say that I have broken more glass than I would like using that approach. The downside is that if you're trying to mechanically remove very hard putty, you can damage the glass, or you can run into one of the glazing points and damage the glass that way. So DAP 33 is the most common oil-based glazing putty. There's what I actually use is called Sarco Multi-Glaze. It is an oil-based product that you can get it on Amazon. It's started out in metal window applications, but it works almost as well as the DAP in terms of longevity, but it sets up to the point where you can paint it in 2 days instead of closer to 2 weeks. So Sarco Multi-Glaze is what I use. The water-based product, I do use it if I'm repairing a window in place. So, sometimes you have to my sister's dog broke a window. I've got some new glass from Klingenberg, just took it over there, put it in place, and did the water-based glazing putty around the side or around the perimeter, and it works really well. It just is, it's not. I think it'll probably last 20 years instead of 40 years. That's really my hunch, and it's only because it's only been around for about 20 years.
Speaking of glass, my wife likes the antique wavy
Leaded glass.
Wavy.
Yeah.
She calls it wavy, maybe
Yeah.
leaded. Is there any way to replicate that?
There are places where you can buy a restoration glass. It's extraordinarily expensive to get it made new, so you're best off salvaging it. So you can go to a lot of these reuse centers and other places and get, so, today we have what's called float glass. We've developed a process for making glass that's perfectly flat and it involves floating it on a liquid. They didn't do that in the past. They would spin it in order to make it flat. So this is leaded glass, doesn't have lead in it. I actually don't even know the etymology. But the wavy glass, I think it's hard to tell sometimes when it's dirty, but the wavy glass is no longer made. So unless you're willing to pay an arm and a leg for it. So try to salvage it, try not to break it. There are people who like it. And it's worth, if you have to replace it, call up one of your local preservation people and give it to them if you need to. And yes.
I was a believer of chain.
Yeah.
So now if the chains, let's say, be damaged, is there a replacing the chain?
There is, in like I know that you can get them at a place called the House of Antique Hardware. It's an online site. Is the chain damaged in that someone painted it and it's no longer, is it kinked or?
Well, I just wondering if it would be damaged. I mean,
Yeah.
It still seemed to work, but it might be.
There are places.
It might be pretty rusted.
Yeah, there are places where you can get the chain. You can actually, all of the hardware is still available. Unfortunately, a lot of it's made overseas and in Europe now, not, and it can be difficult to source easily or quickly, but it is all going to be available.
Possible to switch chain to rope.
You own it. So there are two types of chain-based pulleys or chain setups. One has a spring-based pulley instead of a counterweight. So if you don't have a counterweight and it's got a spring that's internal to the window, the spring manufacturer is called Pullman, Pullman. If you have the spring-based system, you cannot switch away from the chain because the chain is integral to the system. But if it's a counterweight system with sash weights, you can switch to a cord. Before.
If your windows are really sticky, what kind of lubricant, whatever you recommend?
So paste wax, Johnson's paste wax. It will last for a couple years, but you can get Johnson's paste wax in it's the yellow tin. It's $7 for a tin, and you would be able to, you basically rub it on, wait 20 minutes, then kind of buff it out with a microfiber cloth. It'll form a slick surface that will eventually wear away, but will provide lubrication for quite some time. So,
Is that Home Depot?
Home Depot, anywhere. It's like a yellow tin. It's just called Johnson's paste wax. Yeah, I will say that Johnson's is the only one that I'm comfortable recommending because it doesn't have silicone in it. When you're dealing with something like this, silicone is something you need to stay away from because you can't paint over it. Silicone can cause adhesion and adherence problems for other finishes. So if you use something like a paste wax or a lubricant, that's great. Just don't use a silicone lubricant because it will make it. You have to use harsh chemicals to remove the silicone so you can paint it in the future. So I think are we almost out of time?
Well, it's hard to tell because originally it started later, so technically we still have,
Okay, I thought I had another half
45.
hour. Okay,
yeah.
all right.
But we started earlier, so I didn't know where to stop, so keep talking.
Okay.
So the bottom line would be, when you're doing your windows, replace some of the wood on top and bottom. What you call it.
Are you talking on the sash here?
The wood inside the.
The spline and this piece here.
What's laying on it.
Right, this piece here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those pieces. So you're supposed to replace those?
So, if you can pull them out without damaging them, you can reuse them. Part of the issue with these windows is that they have often been neglected for decades. And, people will paint drips, like a drip of paint can cause your window to bind. and not operate well. These splines, these small pieces of wood, are often so covered in paint that it's like they're glued in. And when they get like that, they can cause the sash to bind, and they can make it almost impossible to remove them. It's like you're pulling a glued piece of wood apart from another glued piece of wood. So it can be tricky to remove them. Usually you just have to brute force it. A pair of alligator pliers, or like, you can grab it with a pair of pliers and pull it out. But when you do that, it breaks. So that's, this is something that you should have on hand when you start your window project. You should assume that you're going to need to replace some of this material. Couple other thoughts. Your locks need to work. I've taken the window apart now at this point, but the way that the system is set up, this is the lower sash. This angled piece on the meeting rail will not actually contact or bind with the angled piece on the upper rail unless they are locked. So they want this space takes up the difference that's created by the spline. It fills the separation point between the two sashes, but the lock pulls them both together and prevents them from moving up and down. So the lock is actually an essential part of the air sealing operation. It will prevent them from rattling, make it much tighter. Yes?
So a few of my windows, the lock is gone, but even if I wanted to put it back, where the lock would go, there's like
A center button.
there's like a lot of, I guess, mechanical wear or something. I didn't put a screw in it if I wanted to. It's just wallowed out or something.
There are only aesthetic problems with moving it to the side. You could put two locks if you want. You could just move it to the side. It is, if you have just wallowed out screw holes, you can in fact put a dab of wood glue and a toothpick in and just let it dry, re-drill for the screw holes, and that it'll be as strong as the original application. But if you have serious issues with it, you should not hesitate to just move the whole lock assembly to one side or the other. It's not going to cause an issue other than it might irritate you. So the lock is an important part of the process. There are obviously much more complicated windows than this. You can have curved windows with curves at the top. You can have, this is called a single light window. For whatever reason, each piece of glass is called a light. So you could have a 2-light window with a divider down the middle. You can have a 4-light window with a cross piece. We have a lot of 6/6s is what they're called, where you'll have 6 pieces of glass over 6 pieces of glass. And there will be muntins, M-U-N-T-I-N-S, that divide those pieces of glass. Often those pieces will be rotten, and it is possible to repair those, but it is an involved act of woodworking. They need to be basically remade custom. We only have 2 or 3 common profiles that were used around here, so it's not hard to make them custom, but you need to take them to a skilled or to a woodworker. So, are there any other questions? Any questions? No? Yes?
If you were going to replace the lower part of the lower sash, the whole piece
Yes,
of wood,
the
say
bottom
that-
rail.
Say the whole bottom rail is
Yeah.
rotted out. Would you mortise it? Or would you not do that?
So I would, but you do not need to. The amount of horizontal forces or vertical forces on these windows is fairly low. It only happens when you're raising and lowering them. You can do a floating tenon. You can do a dowel. You can do, I would be reluctant to just do a pocket screw approach, but it would probably work for a great deal of time. So, the key is to make sure that there's a good attachment and to make sure that it's not going to introduce opportunities for water to penetrate the assembly. And as long as it is watertight and is well adhered, you can use multiple ways to attach it. So, no is the answer. You do not need to tenon it or use them as tenon joinery. Yeah. So, a couple other things before. This window was in a wood frame house. So, or it was in a wood frame assembly. So this jamb, this is the outside that would face the exterior. This was held in by trim that came across the top and down the sides. That trim was actually structural essentially, so it was a full 1 inch thick pieces of wood, and then the way it would have done, they would have just had the siding butted up against that. So that is a common approach. Obviously, that assembly needs to be maintained, paint, caulk, reduce water penetration. If this had been installed in a brick house, there would have been brick that comes out. It's actually usually one layer of brick on the exterior of the window, and then covering that joint is what's called brick molding. And brick molding is an ornamental piece, but it's also a critical part of the assembly. So it'd be mitered up the top. You'd have the brick here. The brick molding is this piece of wood. And the joint between the brick molding and the masonry needs to be kept watertight. You'll frequently see gaps there. And if there's a gap there, water can get down in between the brick and access this piece, which is almost always unpainted and unprotected. And if this starts to rot, the side pieces of the jamb, the whole assembly can fail. You can get, it's hard to believe or it's hard to think about it, but many of these were just held with 2 nails. 2 nails here, 2 nails there, and introducing water and rot to this means that the nails come loose and the whole thing just kind of falls apart. So keeping that brick molding tight, keeping it well painted and well sealed is important. It's when you're doing the exterior work on the sill, you should also make sure that the brick molding is well maintained. So, I have plenty more I can talk about if you guys have questions. Is there anything else specifically you want me to discuss? Yes?
So a couple of our windows have been replaced with some very cheap kind of alternatives, and they don't match the rest.
Yeah.
So we're looking at replacing like a wood salvage option, just so they're keeping to match the rest.
Yeah.
What dimensions do you actually need to measure, like at the salvage shop, to make sure that you fit up the window and will
So what is your house? Is it a brick or it's brick? So do you know, the most common window in northern Kentucky is 34.5 inches wide. The height varies. The height, it'll be about 2 inches, the window will be about 2 inches higher than your masonry opening. So from the sill up to the brick, the brick would cover, it would be the lintel over the window. It would cover a portion of this wood.
Okay, so it does need that.
So your window should be about 2 inches higher than the masonry opening and about 4 inches wider. If the problem is a lot of the times when they do replacements, they don't actually remove the old jamb. So if you're starting and you're trying to return something to its historical condition by putting in wood windows where they've already been replaced, you might be able to detect or find out if you still have the jamb beneath the new window, and if that's the case, you just need sashes. And sashes can either be made, you can mail order sashes basically if you have the right dimensions, or you can get someone around here to make them. A regular single light sash is not hard to make or to find someone to make. A 6/6 is actually extremely irritating to make. You'll struggle. So if I were trying to do that, I would start by trying to make sure that the old jambs are not still intact behind the new window. Yes,
Can these windows still be custom fabricated today?
it can be, yeah. There's a guy in Indiana who makes them. Obviously, if you are a commercial project where you're doing a big historic preservation tax credit project, you're able to get them more easily than if you're just having one made. It's easier to batch produce them, but yes, they can still be made. And like I said, if I got into this and I went it, and I've got historic woodworking tools. I have molders, and I've got a mortiser that was made in 1939 that was, they're all of the old tooling to produce these things. Some of it is still actually, you can buy it new. So it is possible to outfit a wood shop to make this sort of stuff fairly easily. I don't know if fairly easily is quite right, but it's still possible. Yeah, any other questions? Go for it.
We're rearranging a bathroom, and now the wood window is going to be in the shower.
That is a bit of a problem. First you want to start by doing an opaque glass, I assume. Dickey's Glass on Monmouth Street here, you can go there and get, you want to get a tempered glass that is not transparent. I just did this, it was like $10 more expensive than regular tempered glass. In terms of water, making it so that it is resistant, you want to make sure that your shower is not blasting on it permanently, but I would start with a chemical treatment. So you get an epoxy-based sealer, clear penetrating epoxy sealer, strip it down, seal it, and then do a solid paint, and that's really all you're going to be able to do. So a clear penetrating epoxy sealer, CPES, is a product that you can get on Amazon. It's usually used in the marine boating industry, so it is a fine approach. Having will the wood sill be over the tile, or were you going to try to tile all the way up to it? Do you know?
Haven't decided quite yet.
Yeah, so
We
maybe
did
it
get a
happens.
rainfall shower head. to make sure
But
it's-
that'll help. It will require maintenance. That's really all that I can say for sure about it. As you'll need to keep an eye on it and make sure that you don't have standing water that causes rot issues. But yeah, yes.
I don't know if you know, but for like wood, old wood and stuff, there's paint, some parts would have paint on it. Is there a product that can get that paint off that wood? Do you know what you have?
Just a stripper? Is that what you're?
Well, no, I mean, I got the wood, I don't know if it's original,
Right.
but I guess somebody painted the wall in that, there's like some paint, like drips of paint on wood, and some on windows also. Is there a product you can put on it just to get the paint off and not destroy the wood or make it?
So latex paint is very easy to remove. So if it is a latex-based product or a water-based paint, you probably will be able to remove it without damaging any of the lower surface. So if it was painted in the last 20 or 30 years, I think you would be able to do that. Again, citrus strip is the orange stuff that you get from Home Depot. It's fairly mild. It doesn't work as fast as you might want it to, but in an application like this, that's good because you can have finer control over what it removes. There are specific strippers that are designed just for latex paint that use enzymes to break it down. So if you have if it's a paint drip from 50 years ago, your ability to remove it is probably going to be remove it without damaging the surface finish beneath is going to be limited. But if it is a latex base, you might be able to just use one of those mild stripper products. More generally, if you are stripping a lot of paint, you should in fact test it for lead. You should not sand or produce, basically, we're lucky now in that the upside of COVID is that we all know what an N95 mask is now. And if you could expose yourself, if it will protect you against a virus, it'll protect you against lead paint. So if you are going to muck around with the paint at all, wear a good mask, an N95 style mask. Do not sand it, do not scrape it if it's lead. You can strip it if it's lead at your own risk. The main product that people would use to do that is called peel away. And the way that it works is it's actually an alkaline stripper. So it's kind of like lye, or like you paste it on. It's a paste, and then you put a piece of paper, a wax impregnated paper, over it. So when you wait for a day, the paper prevents the solvent from evaporating, and then in order to remove the paint, you just peel the paper away. Hence, peel away in the name. So it will remove lead-based paint, and it actually encapsulates it, and it is a relatively safe way to do it. So the only way that I would ever recommend anyone deal with lead paint if they wanted to remove it is the use of peel away as a stripper. If it's very mild, if it's a small amount of stuff and you're not sure, be careful. Use a vacuum. You should always wash a window that you're starting to repair before you do anything else. There are different types of chemicals you can wash it with. Trisodium phosphate, which is called TSP, is going to be the best paint for you to start with. TSP is also used in lead paint remediation and will encapsulate some of that, but it's a very alkaline stripper, so wear thick gloves up to your elbows. It's not going to like immediately burn you, but if you leave it on your arms too much, it can cause an alkaline burn. TSP, or the other cleaner that I'll use if it's not that dirty, is borax, which is a laundry detergent essentially. It's also an alkaline cleaner, but has some wood preservative properties. So these are soaps that you can get at any hardware store. You can get them at Home Depot. They come in the powdered boxes, like old spick and span type stuff. So clean your window, before you paint it or do anything else. Those are the materials. So what else do we got? Any additional questions? So a couple more things. Your other piece of hardware is your pulleys. Some of the pulleys can deteriorate because they actually have a wood wheel. Those are fixable. You can go to a hardware store and buy a dowel and drill a hole through it. I've had to do that before. I have a box of pulleys at this point that probably have 500 different pulleys that I've pulled out of different windows. There are a lot of folks like me, so if you're looking for something like that, it's often something you can just find in the restoration circles. There are some minor other window hardware that you might run into, but short of the weights and the pulleys, you're not going to have a lot of issues. So, yeah, I think I'm good.
Well,
You?
let's thank Dave for his time. Thank you.